Hello, I am Carl Zha. I'm a Twitter personality and a podcaster. I run the Silk and Steel podcast, focusing on China, history, culture, and politics. And today I am debating Lyman Stone, who is an adjunct fellow from American Enterprise Institute and a fellow from Institute of Families. You guys can Google these think tanks. I think they're well-known Washington think tanks, and you can do more research about that. But today, the topic we're going to discuss, Lyman, you want to take it away? Take it away.
Sure. So a week back or so, you had a debate with Noah Smith, and he wasn't quite as aggressive in his criticism as I felt could be justified. And so I was happy to propose taking a more direct tack of saying basically I was prepared to argue the proposition that China is an aggressive country that needs to be, or an aggressive state that needs to be contained. So that's what I'm hoping to argue today. I should clarify that I am affiliated with some institutions. However, none of them have me on staff to work on foreign policy. I work on totally unrelated issues. My interest in China is purely personal.
Now, just for my own personal edification, how did you come into this China watching business? Because I know your focus, I believe, is on demographics, right? I mean, like it's totally unrelated field. Could you just tell my audience how you came into China watching?
Sure. So, I mean, China's a big country with some interesting demographic issues. But my education was actually in trade policy originally, a long time ago. And so, obviously, China's the elephant in the room for any trade policy stuff. And then I worked on trade policy for the U.S. government for 4 years. And then I lived in Hong Kong for the last 2 years.
Okay, so the reason why I take up on Lyman on this debate is because Lyman's talking points is basically the same as that of the United States national security establishment for the last 30 years. But in the last few years, this talking points has really gained a lot of prominence, especially after Donald Trump assumed the presidency. And now with U.S. is taking a drastic turn in its handling its U.S.-China relationship. I feel this has happened without much public input and much public debate because for about 30 years U.S.-China relationship has been relatively stable, but in the last four or 5 years, this relationship really take a nosedive, and a lot of it is driven by the talk of China needs to be contained. So I feel this is a great opportunity to really hash out some of the arguments why it's even necessary and how is China even a threat to the world peace. So I'm going to have Lyman to make his argument beforehand, and then I will respond in my counter argument. So I'm going to hand my mic to you, Lyman.
Great. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. I do have some slides because I find I'm not too smart, so I need to have some pictures to understand my own thinking. So I have a slide with some big bold print and some pictures. So my argument is China's an aggressive.
So it doesn't get cropped.
Okay. We have to wait for a second. So.
Lyman slides. Okay. They can't. Not when I set up. Okay, you guys. I'm just setting up a new scene here for Lyman and yeah. Not this one. This NDI source. And then, okay, Lyman, can you please say something?
Yep. I'm here.
Okay, looks like it's working.
Great. Okay. So my argument is that China is an aggressive state that needs to be contained. But I want to stay from the beginning. My interest in this is not that I want China to be hurt or Chinese people to be poor. In fact, it's quite the opposite. My goal, and I hope everyone else's, is that we'll have no wars and we can all get rich and happy. That's the goal, right? It's not to try and make China a democracy. It's not to try and make China into America. I don't want a lot of people to die in wars, and I want us all to be rich and happy. That seems like something we should be able to agree on. So the problem is that I don't think China's current government shares these goals. Now, I can't say if China's past government necessarily shared them. I can't say if a future government will. My concern is just that the current government does not seem to share these goals. So, Exhibit 1, China's current government does not share the goal to get rich. I know this is going to sound weird because China has such fast economic growth, but oops. What's going on here? There we go. Oops. Okay. I skipped a slide somehow. But in fact, China's government no longer has this rapid economic growth. It scrapped the annual economic growth target. You might think, well, that's a good thing. Maybe they're letting the free thing. But that's not what's going on. Economic growth is tailed off in China. So here I'm showing level of income in real terms per person in a given economic growth per capita that occurred over the next 5 years. What you can see, it used to be the Chinese economic growth was really exceptional, like genuinely exceptional. Very few countries achieve this. But recently, China's economic growth, mainland China's, the PRC's economic growth, has been lower than what we've observed when Taiwan was at a similar level of economic growth or of economic income, when Korea was at a similar level, or when Japan was at a similar level. So China has moved away from exceptional growth towards quite unexceptional growth. At the same time that the government has abandoned growth targets. They're just not making the effort. It's not the number one priority. It's not the number one priority for the current reformists. Reformists in China want the current government is not that. They are not primarily interested in growth. They're interested in something else. So, my next exhibit, China's current government does not desire to avoid war. Again, previous governments maybe did, future governments might, the current one doesn't. My example for this, the case study I really want to focus on is Bhutan. I want to talk about Bhutan because it doesn't have like the hot button stuff of like the Senkaku Islands or India or like Taiwan or something. This one's really a dumb dispute. So China didn't even recognize Bhutan until 1998. Of course, the Republic of China still does not. That's a little fun thing there. In 1962, of course, Bhutan sided with India in the border war. But in the 1980s, a direct dispute resolution process began between Bhutan and India. So for 40 years, the unsettled border has been being disputed. In 1998, PRC recognized Bhutan. 2004, there were some minor compromises. So this is the situation. The places where China and Bhutan's public official claims differ are these hashed areas. Now, in 2003 to 2005, China proposed to basically let Bhutan keep some of these northern areas, and there's a few other areas not marked, in exchange for Bhutan giving up a bunch of areas in the southwest, including areas that China never officially claimed before that deal. Bhutan said, no, we don't want that. But in 2009, as a gesture of good faith, they gave up all this territory anyway. They just gave it up unilaterally. Not a lot of people live there, though, so it wasn't like a huge loss to them. From 2009 to 16, there was no big progress on territorial disputes. But in 2017, China invented a new territorial claim in this area. This is called the Doklam Plateau. In 2017, China built a road into this area. Again, China has no published map that actually puts a claim line here. So China does claim this area here, which is still in dispute, publicly. But there's no public map establishing China's claim in this area. But China claimed it anyway. They tried to build a road into it. India sent some people in because India and Bhutan share military and foreign relations. They threw some rocks at each other. Everyone got angry. People went home. It was not settled, but everybody backed off. Well, in 2020, there's, of course, been the India-China conflict in Ladakh. And then suddenly, in July 2020, China invented another new claim here in eastern Bhutan. This area is not even on the Chinese border. It doesn't even border the PRC, and yet they're claiming it. So what's going on here? This area is called Sakteng. Why does China claim this? Well, the answer is Arunachal Pradesh. That's this part of India over here. It has 1.3 million people. It was continuously controlled by the British Raj and then by India. However, China claims it, has claimed it for a while. Nonetheless, India controls it and has for a long time. But China claims it. But in all their 40 years of discussion with Bhutan, they never, ever mentioned that their claim to Arunachal Pradesh, oh, hey, it also includes this big chunk of Bhutan over here. They never mentioned that until suddenly in 2020. Oh, by the way, we claim a whole chunk of your eastern territory that's not even on the line of effective control. So China is modifying its claims. And the reason they're doing it is because they want to punish India. So this Ladakh border conflict is important. I don't know who actually started the conflict that happened. Probably the Indians threw the rocks first or whatever, because, well, they probably did. But what we do know is that the force buildup that led to all this began because China was upset that India was building a road inside Indian territory. I mean the disputed territory. India was building a road in undisputed territory, and China was very upset about that. And so they built up forces, and then India built up forces, and then, somebody shot first, and then people died. All that to say, what happened was that China was upset about something India was doing in territory China does not even officially claim. They also made incursions into Sikkim, which is territory they only recognized Indian control over in 2004. So, also, of course, allies of the current government would like even broader claims. This was this tweet that went viral about a dispute over is Vladivostok really Russian. This isn't a government statement, but it is a journalist definitely supporting the government. So what's happening is that China's current government is abrogating previously settled disputes. They're creating new claims, and they are reigniting old feuds. They are not trying to avoid war. They are creating conflict. So my final point, and then I'll be done, and I'll hand it back, and I'll make sure to give Carl plenty of time to dismantle all my arguments, is that the current government of China is actively creating military forces whose only purpose is long-range aggression. So this is the date of construction of the tonnage of all warships currently in service in the U.S. and Chinese navies. What you can see is the U.S. built up a ton of ships because we were like, Soviets, we got to beat them. And then after we beat them, we downsized the Navy, right? We stopped building so many ships. And then Obama did it again. And what you can see in China is China used to basically have no Navy. And then they built a considerable Navy out to here. And then, they kind of went down. Maybe there were budget issues during the recession or something. And then Xi Jinping came to power, and boom, you get this huge increase in construction of naval vessels. In response to that increase, Trump expands the rollout of American vessels. So what we see is China began this particular arms race, and the U.S. responded. Also, the interesting thing is we can look at the history of the size of the U.S. Navy. It's in decline. It's not like China is facing some unprecedented naval threat. The biggest Navy in the region and in the world, the U.S. Navy, is actually shrinking over time on every scale. So it's not like there was some big new threat China was defending itself from. A big part of this new tonnage is aircraft carriers. China has built 2 and has 2 in construction, making it soon to be the second biggest carrier power in the world. Interestingly enough, in response to this, Japan has begun building aircraft carriers. So this arms race isn't just the U.S. China's expansion of its naval power has created an arms race with other countries in the region as well. So the curious thing about these aircraft carriers is that every single inch of China's territorial claims, even Taiwan, even the Senkaku Islands, or I guess the Diaoyao Islands, as China would call them, is within the combat radius of a Chengdu J-7, the main fighter in China's Air Force, and certainly of the newer craft as well. That is, from existing land bases, which are far more secure than an aircraft carrier, they can already strike and defend every piece of territory that China claims. These aircraft carriers add 0 combat capability to China's defense of its territorial claims. They are offensive weapons. And the U.S. is famous for this. We know this because the U.S. is the carrier power par excellence. And how do we use them? Offensively. You don't use carriers to defend yourself. You use them to attack other countries. That's what they're for. Of course, China's reasoning behind this is about the second island chain. The second island chain they don't like to talk about this, includes integral U.S. territory in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. So China's like, oh, we just need to defend the second island chain, including American territory that they want to have offensive weapons against. So what's going on here is that despite a reduction in U.S. naval forces in the region and globally, China has provoked an arms race that is leading to many countries in the region expanding their arms, and they have shifted from defensive to long-range offensive vessels. This is not just about reclaiming Taiwan. It's about regional and global hegemony. Contrary to public claims, China's current government desires to become an interventionist hegemon like the United States. This is worrying to me because I am quite critical of U.S. intervention abroad. I think it is excessive and has been dangerous to world peace in many cases. And yet China is headed down the same course, building a carrier-focused navy that is designed to lord it over weak countries that don't have air power. So the government has shifted away from rapid economic developments. They have escalated claim disputes and invented new claims, and they have developed a navy whose only purpose is force projection. For all these reasons, China is an aggressive state which must be contained. Will it be the US that does it? Will it be India? Will it be Japan? Will it be who knows what? I don't know. But on its current course, it is very clear that China is headed towards increasing systematic aggression against anyone who crosses the current regime's path. So that's my opening statement. I'm not sure exactly how long I took, but Carl, I yield the floor to however long you'd like to take to respond.
Okay, Xiangyu, can I talk now?
I actually figured out how to make it automatic, so you can just talk wherever.
Okay. So can I speak now, Xiangyu?
Yes.
Okay, so first I like to respond about the territorial claims, right? And China actually, when the People's Republic of China was founded on October 1st, 1949, it actually inherited territorial dispute with all its neighbors from the previous government, the Republic of China, right? So because Mr. Lyman has used PowerPoint, so I'm compelled to share my screen at least to bring up some graphs so we can see what I'm talking about. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show I'm just going to show a tweet I tweeted somebody else's tweet. Can everybody see my screen right now? Is there a lag?
Carl, I need to set up a new scene for you to share your screen. Hold on a second.
Oh, okay. So a little bit of technical difficulty. Meanwhile, I will just talk through it while we're trying to get the visual aids to pop up. So, because, as a result of Western imperialist power aggression, by Western I also included Japan. The Qing Empire in the late 19th century was facing pressure from all its sides. From British from the south, Russia from the north, French from the direction of Vietnam. And so that's where all these territorial disputes were first created. For example, Lyman brought up the border dispute with India. This was created by British because Britain had their pet concern was to keep the crown of their empire, which is India, and they were really scared of the Russians come in from the north and take India away from them. And so they have this idea to build out buffers from India and onward. So that led to their first disastrous Afghan campaign, and later to the British expedition to invade Tibet. And then what the British government did is they decided to draw lines on the border where they felt by leveraging the geographic feature that would be more defensible for India without regard for the traditional borders between, say, the Qing Empire and the Mughal Empire in India. And at this time, China was embroiled in a series of foreign wars, starting from, 2 opium wars, ending with 8-nation alliance, including UK, United States, Russia, Japan, Germany, France, Austria-Hungary, Italy. Basically, at the time, who is who of the imperialist power all went to China, sacked Beijing, forced China to sign a whole bunch of unequal treaties, including ceding, British got Hong Kong through the first 2 opium wars, and then you receive a new lease on the new territory, part of Hong Kong, for 99 years, and basically the outside power were rushing in to carve up China. So as a result of this, when the Qing Empire collapsed in 1911 Chinese Revolution, all these border problem got inherited by Republic of China. But Republic of China is a very weak state. It had the claims, but you could not enforce it. So now, can people see my screen right now? Hello? Okay, so this is a tweet that they basically took the image from Wikipedia. So this is what you're looking at is a territorial claim of Republic of China, right? So you can see the borders, the current international borders of the countries today, and the green area is all the land that's claimed by Republic of China, the successor state to the Qing Empire, because when the Chinese Revolution succeeded, the Qing Emperor abdicated to the government of Republic of China, right? So that's where the succession came from. And so the Republic of China claimed to have inherited all the land of Qing Empire on 1911. Right, so that included the country of Mongolia, the area of Tannu Tuva, or the Tuva Republic today in the Russian Federation. There's a little bit of the Tajikistan, basically actually 40% of current country of Tajikistan. This area is what's called what the Indians renamed Arunachal Pradesh after 1950s, and then there's this area around Myanmar. It's currently it's a northern Myanmar's Kachin state. This also was claimed by Republic of China. And Taiwan is a special case because at this time, after the first Sino-Japanese War, the Qing government was forced to cede Taiwan to Japan. So when Republic of China was first founded, Taiwan was still a Japanese colony. So that was a special case. But what this actually does not show was that the Republic of China claims even more territory than that. And I will show you. This is so when the Chiang Kai-shek was in power, and when the KMT at the end of the World War II, as a result of war settlement, Japan was supposed to give up all its territories outside the Japanese main islands. So Japan gave up territory, its colony in Korea and Taiwan. It also gave up all the islands in South China Sea. So Chiang Kai-shek's KMT government, what they did is they sent warships, which they got from United States, and they sent the warship to South China Sea, and they claim basically this whole wide swath area of South China Sea. And Chiang Kai-shek drew what's called the 11-dash line, right? So you can see it goes all the way around up to the Gulf of Tonkin, up to in the northern Vietnam. Now, what in case of South China Sea, when People's Republic was founded, it was has a very friendly relationship with government of North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh. So what the People's Republic did is it removed 2-dash from the 11-dash line. It actually ceded an island inside in the South China Sea. I'm gonna pull up of all RFA, Radio Free Asia, which is basically CIA cutout. So they have no reason to speak well of China. And here, this is what I quote the RFA article. And so here's what they talk about what happened in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Chinese Communist Party allowed the North Vietnamese communist regime to build a radar station and goods transit point on one of the South China Sea island chains in spirit of comradeship and brotherhood. In 1957, they even signed a secret agreement ceding Bai Longwei Island in China's archipelago to Hanoi government, right? I mean, RFA is actually trying to castigate, the Chinese Communist government as not sufficiently patriotic to the Chinese national interest by giving territory away, right? But this is just an instance of how China handled its territorial claims. Where's my? Oh, here we go. So that's how now the previously 11 dash line that extends all the way into Gulf of Tonkin is now only 9 dash line because China and Vietnam actually settled the maritime borders in Gulf of Tonkin to both sides' satisfaction, right? So this is a case of successful negotiation. Now let's revisit the claim of the Republic China versus the border of the People's Republic China. So after People's Republic China was founded, it entered border negotiations with all the countries around it. And as a result, all the land border of the People's Republic China have been settled with all the countries, with the exception of India and Bhutan. And that's the reason I believe Lyman had to bring out the one specific case of Bhutan, because Bhutan just happened to be one of the 2 countries that China still have a disputed land border. So as you can see just from this map, People's Republic of China have gave up all the claims with all the other countries, especially this huge area of northern Myanmar, right? I think I have a map somewhere. I hope I still have a map somewhere of Myanmar. I don't, but it doesn't matter. So, and also in its negotiation with Tajikistan, that 40% area of Tajikistan that Republic of China had claimed, China has given up. So China did have some border conflict with Soviet Union during the Sino-Soviet conflict, but the Russian-China border was settled in 2000. So right now there's no border dispute between China and Russia. China recognized the independence of People's Republic of Mongolia, right? When PRC was founded, so there's no territorial dispute there. And in 1990. After the Cold War, China and Vietnam entered into border negotiation about their land border. I'm talking about the land border. I'm not talking about the maritime dispute right now, because that's a different set of problems. So China and Vietnam, as a result of their year-long negotiation, by 2000, they have settled all its land border disputes. Now, the only 2 countries remain is India and Bhutan. Now, the case of Bhutan is very special because Bhutan is a very small country, and it also does not have an independent foreign policy, because Bhutan's foreign policy is actually handled by the government of India. So in other case, the only state that refused so far to negotiate border negotiation with China is India, and this happened again and again and again and again. It happened in 1950s. It happened in 1960s. It resulted in the Sino-Indian War of 1962. So the border dispute between China and India is ongoing, and it's primarily as a result of the refusal of Indian government to enter into negotiation with China. Now, the Lyman brought up the points about claims, right? Now, the claim, claim is a claim. When you have a border dispute, when you have border negotiation, there's always a give and take, right? I mean, you can think of as haggling, right? But right now, China, what it has not done, it did not initiate a war with Bhutan to achieve its aims. While Lyman does brought the point that there was border conflict recently on the Indian-China border, where 20 Indian soldiers were killed. Now, first of all, we do not know exactly what happened, because so far the only information we have are the leaked sources to the Indian news media by the Indian military. And those reports are very contradictory, because first Indian media reported that China intruded deep into Indian territory of Ladakh, and then the Indian government came out and saying, no, there's no intrusions by Chinese army into Indian-held territory. And then there's even like different scenario about how the actual border dispute happened. But one fact is clear, was there was during the deadly clash, no firearm was used, right? The Indian and Chinese army were fighting each other with sticks and stones, right? These are the two most populous countries in the world with one of the largest standing armies, and yet they're fighting with sticks and stones. Why? Because China and India had a protocol for over 30 years that in order not to escalate into a war, neither side were to use firearm in a conflict. They may carry firearm, but they may not fire. So that's why they were fighting stick and stone. And to claim that somehow a Chinese army is going to conquer the world with sticks and stone, that's just a ridiculous claim. Anybody can see that. And the whole reason for that is because neither government wanted in a mere border tension to escalate into a wider conflict of war, right? So that is why both sides strictly follow the protocol. No firearms, kung fu kicks, okay. Guns, no. And after the deadly clash, both sides have entered negotiations and have had de-escalation settlement. And as a result of the de-escalation settlement, both the Chinese and Indian army have pulled back from the points of contention. These are not signs of aggressive China trying to invade another country. This is clearly a case of long-standing border dispute, that got hot. Yet both sides finally come to agreement. It's to neither side's interest to escalate this into a war. So again, this will refute Lyman's contention that China is being aggressive in terms of territorial claim or territorial expansion, but that just simply did not happen. And about the U.S. military. Now let's talk about the U.S. Military and U.S. operation overseas, right? First of all, China has not fought a war in the last 30 years. And on the other hand, yes, China is building up capability because, China 30 years ago, China was a desperately poor country. Under Deng Xiaoping specifically prioritized economy over military because China needs to bring up its economy. As a result, China's military development has lagged seriously behind, especially when U.S. has been aggressively increasing its military budget. Now, that's something I also wanted to show is the military expenditure by countries, right? This is updated in 2018. So as you can see, we have United States, and this is China, right? And United States by far, its military expenditure by far exceeds that of China. So we can talk about, how many ships U.S. has, how many new tonnage U.S. has. But the fact is, China up to date only has 2 aircraft carriers, right? Lyman brought up a good point that aircraft carrier is an offensive weapon, a weapon of power projection. China built up 2 aircraft carriers, and so far China has not used its aircraft carrier in conflict or war with its neighbors, whereas United States have more than 10 aircraft carriers floating around the world's ocean at any given time. And U.S. aircraft carriers have engaged in military conflicts, from Afghanistan to Iraq, right? And Libya. And U.S. has deployed its military base all over the world. I mean, U.S. have military base in Okinawa, in South Korea. U.S. has this ring of fire circling around China's borders, right? Let's look at China's border again. So U.S. have military base in Okinawa, in South Korea, right? You used to have military base in Philippines until they got kicked out, and U.S. used to have military base in Vietnam until the Vietnam War was concluded. But U.S. does have defense agreement with ASEAN nation like Singapore, and U.S. does have defense treaties that obligated itself to the defense of Taiwan, right? So you have U.S. military surrounding all the neighborhood of China. This is so far from the U.S. mainland, and we are yet to believe that somehow China is a more aggressive power, right? So if we're going to contain China because there's some supposedly concern from its neighbors, what should we do about United States? China is not the one that has caused 1 million Iraqi civilian death in the last 30 years. China did not create the condition for the rise of ISIS in Middle East, right, by destroying a secular state. And China did not destroy Libya, one of the countries in Africa that enjoyed highest standard of living in Africa before U.S. intervention, right? And afterwards, now we have people selling black African slaves on open market in Libya. This is the world that has been impacted by U.S. So if Lyman's argument is that somehow China is an aggressive power that needs to be contained, what should we do? We should really be doing something about United States. I mean, it's United States present a clear and present danger. And so far, all the conjectures about how China might use its aircraft carrier is just that. They're conjectures. They are what China might do with its power. And so far, we have not seen China deploy its military power in a war in last 30 years. But we have seen U.S. time and again doing it. So this is I'm sure Lyman has would like to add to respond to that. I mean, there are other points made by Lyman, but let's focus case by case. So I will yield my mic to Lyman and let him respond to what I just said.
Thanks. I mean, you raised a lot of good points. I'll kind of try and go back in the order of the original points I made. First, on the economic side, I mean, it seems like there's not necessarily a disagreement that the current government has shifted away from a focus on economic growth. In fact, economic growth very much has declined. In fact, in a lot of Chinese provinces, economic growth has actually been negative per capita for the last few years. I can show data on that if you're interested. So a lot of Chinese provinces, even quite poor ones, have been in a recession now for about 2 or 3 years. So we've definitely seen a shift there. It's significant. And this is part of how we think about a country's interest in the world, is if they say, well, we just want to live at peace with everyone and economically develop, we would say, well, is that really what you want? Or while you have, your internal provinces slipping into a years-long economic growth recession, even as they have an income level similar to Africa, do you want to still be building aircraft carriers? So that's one thing I would just point out, is that my first argument definitely still stands. On the second argument about claims, you're absolutely right that China was deeply colonially mistreated by many countries. That's totally true. Hong Kong was stolen to facilitate the world's most successful drug cartel ever, the British Empire. Totally true. It's totally true. I'm very well aware of that unfortunate history and the mistreatment of China there. At the same time, it's wrong to say that China's border disputes originate with colonialism. They continued under colonialism, but China invaded Vietnam over a border dispute in 1788. China engaged in 20 years of war and counterinsurgency throughout Yunnan to bring it to settle the borders there. In the 1760s, they invaded Burma. China repeatedly engaged in wars in Tibet and Xinjiang to settle the border there, to conquer new territory, all these things. The idea that China's borders are uncertain because of colonialism is false. And it's not just false in China's case. I want to be clear. We have to understand that borders, as we understand them today, are modern constructions. Pre-modern countries generally, in most cases, simply did not have fixed borders. So to say that China's border problems were created by colonialism, I mean, borders were created by colonialism to a considerable extent. I mean borders in the sense of fixed lines. Yes, there were still conceptions of territorial control, but this whole idea of a fixed line, China never drew a border between Tibet and the Indian territory, the various Indian polities that existed. It's not like China had a border under the Qing dynasty and then colonialists destroyed it. No border was ever established. Chinese maps varied in where they drew the border, and they drew it usually just as a very general line, just like across the mountains. So the border ambiguity was continued under colonialism, not created by it. And in fact, the colonial powers, yes, they, in a hostile fashion, tried to carve up China. At the same time, a considerable amount of what China perceived as trying to carve it up, for example, with the McMahon line delineating the Indo-Tibetan border, a considerable amount of what China perceived as trying to carve it up was countries that had a more defined sense of borders making an effort to rationalize the border. Now, you can say that that rationalization is itself colonialism, and I understand that argument. I'm sympathetic to it in some level. But at some point, modern states do have to accept a border. And yes, I understand that China's upset that they didn't get every single piece of territory that they would have liked to have within the borders that they wanted to draw. But, like, you make compromises. That's reality. Pretty much every developed country has ceded lands to other countries peacefully at some point in time. The U.S. at one point claimed like all of British Columbia from Canada, and we ceded that. I live in Canada right now, so I'm acutely aware of the many border conflicts we've had with Canada, generally resolved peacefully. And furthermore, it is important that you focused on land borders. Yes, he said, oh yeah, all the land borders are settled except India and Bhutan. That is, all the land borders are settled except in the one country big enough to resist. Right? Russia could resist, but the reason Russia and China have settled borders is not because they just like talked it out. They fought some wars over it. And even today, as I shared in that tweet, there's a significant contingent of the supporters of the government right now in China, and I know it's not official government policy, but supporters of the government who aren't totally comfortable with the resolution reached with Russia, who would like to revisit that. And you mentioned, oh yeah, Russia's border, the border was finally settled in 2000. Tajikistan in 1991. Sikkim, which I mentioned in India, China finally recognized India's control of Sikkim in 2004. Bhutan, there were negotiations from 1980 to 2005 that were productive, and they kind of weren't productive after that so much. Vietnam settled in 2000. You know what we can see under all of these? These were all conducted under the more economically growth-minded, internal strengthening, reformist government of China, not the government today, which is my whole point. Today's government is different. Today's government is not seeking peaceful resolution with India. They are seeking conflict multiple times. Now, yes, they don't want it to escalate into a full war. Nobody wants a massive war. They're testing the waters to see how much they can get. But eventually, those tests are going to provoke a bigger conflict. Eventually, they are going to cross a red line on someone else's territory that does create a war. Countries don't go to war because they just want war. They go to war because they want power, and they miscalculate the resistance the other side is willing to put up. And that is the problem, is that China does have aggressive goals, and they're eventually going to miscalculate how much they can bully another country, and it'll start a war. And China might win that war, but thousands of people will die in the process. Furthermore, I don't want to like defend India too much, because Lord knows they have their own problems. But it's not true that India hasn't entered into negotiations. There is an active negotiation arrangement between China and India, and between Bhutan and India. Negotiations do occur. They just haven't been settled because the disputes between the two sides are very difficult to reconcile. So again, India might be making irrational claims, yada, yada, all that, but it's not true that they're refusing to negotiate. It's just that the negotiations have not proceeded to either side's satisfaction. Also on the Ladakh conflict, again, we don't know who started it. Personally, it wouldn't shock me at all if India is the one who threw the first stone. In fact, I think India's own report is that they like burned a tent that China had set up with somewhere. And so yeah, India might have started it. But we do have to look at the wider context. It is a matter of public record. China's government does not even dispute that the order of events is that India was building a highway. I forget the number of it. I could look it up. But India was building a highway within territory that China does not claim, between territories that China does not claim. And China was upset about India building this road in an area China doesn't even claim. And so they greatly expanded their military presence along the border. Now, that doesn't mean that they threw the first stone. That's true. But this is what I'm saying, is that China is doing this thing where they're getting more and more prickly and paranoid about other countries, and more determined to assert themselves, and it increases the risk, right? Maybe India threw the first stone. Maybe they burned the first tent. But the conflict escalated because China was upset that India was doing something that no one disputes was within India's right to do. There is a structural problem in China's approach right now, that even where they don't technically start the fight, they set the conditions for greater risk and greater conflict throughout the region. Now, finally, you mentioned, maybe we need to contain the U.S. I definitely do think that the U.S. has been far too interventionist abroad. I'm very much on record being very much opposed to numerous engagements we have in many places. When there was rumbles about the U.S., like maybe we should invade Venezuela, I published an article stridently arguing against this. I'm not going to defend the U.S.'s record. It's certainly far from spotless. But I will note that you literally said, what about the United States? Whataboutism is a textbook example of an evasion by a person who does not want to actually address the claim that is being debated. The claim is not, is the U.S. naughty? Yes, the U.S. is often quite naughty. We do very mean things to people, very bad things. Agreed. The claim is China aggressive and a risk? The U.S. might be also. I'm open to the idea that maybe the European Union needs to stop free riding on U.S. defense commitments and increasing its own military presence so that they can perhaps counterbalance the fact that the U.S. is basically the only functional military in the democratic world. I'm open to that argument. And as I mentioned, Japan is one of the countries that's been doing the most balancing against China recently. So, and of course, Japan has not engaged in an aggressive war since World War II. They don't even technically have a military, although of course they do. Their self-defense force is quite capable. So yeah, if you want to argue that the U.S. shouldn't be the one countering China, okay, maybe that's true. But I didn't say the U.S. needs to counter China. I said someone needs to. So if you would like to debate against a claim I didn't make, have at it. But the point is, deflecting to, what about the U.S.? That's not a valid argument. That's just an unwillingness to actually deal with the claim on the table. But while we're doing whataboutism, let's just go all the way. You mentioned the selling of slaves in Libya. Well, I could get on Taobao right now and I can buy some Uyghur labor. So if we want to talk about the selling of unfree labor, this is well documented. It is easy to find. You can purchase unfree labor. It is advertised with military surveillance. You can look it up. You can find it today. So if you want to talk about the sale of labor,
right there. I have to stop you
the
right
sale of labor.
there.
The largest amount of unfree labor in the world is in Western China.
Be quiet. I have to stop you right there because, selling of black African slaves on open market, that's well documented, right?
Yes.
Well reported.
Yes.
You just made a claim that you said you can go to Taobao today, you can purchase a Uyghur slave. So I challenge you right now, open up your browser, go to Taobao and show me where you can purchase a Uyghur
Unfortunately,
slave.
I can't do Chinese characters on my keyboard.
So let's back up your claim right now. This is your chance.
Okay, I don't have a Chinese keyboard, so I can't do it, but I'm going to send you right now a link. It's called Uyghurs for Sale, and it'll provide you, I believe they have screenshots in the report. Let me see if they do. One of these reports has screenshots. I'm not sure if this is the one. Ah, yes, they have screenshots. So I'm going to send you the link right here. Okay. And I'll go ahead and share my screen so that people can see it.
There's a link too. ASPI, of course. ASPI, yes. Very, very trustworthy.
Hey,
and for my audience who does not know about ASPI, ASPI is an Australian, quote unquote, Australian think tank. But if you go to their sponsor page, they're being founded by Raytheon, Lockheed Martin.
Yeah. So if you'd like to debate the ethics of military defense contracting, I invite you to look at, who funds any Chinese company? The Chinese government, a military entity. Okay?
Sure.
So,
but can you show me the
that's
link?
a two-edged sword.
Can you show me a link, go to Taobao, where I can purchase a Uyghur slave?
As I said, I actually can't do Chinese on this keyboard, and also I have the very
or can you show us a screenshot of that, because that's
I'll share
like
it right
a
now.
Carl, he showed you. He sent you the link. Can you open it? Can you open the link he sent you? Because you're already on the screen share. It'll be easier this way if you just.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen right now, and sorry, I'm sharing the wrong screen. Yeah, I think I'm sharing it. Can you see it?
Hold on a second. It's a little bit broken. Just gonna. Okay, I can see it now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's probably not actually Taobao.
Okay,
I was exaggerating.
Is your screen maximized?
Yeah, I think.
Yes. Okay, like I can see the Chinese and the English translation, and I can verify that at least this says what it says. It says we provide a lot of government-sponsored workers dispatching from Xinjiang. Right. This is a different from your claim that you can go to Taobao and order a Uyghur slave.
Do you think these people have a choice in going?
We can actually talk about this, because this Chinese
do you think these people have a choice in this?
Okay, so we actually, people can go on and Google Uyghur labor in China before in around 2010 and 2009, right? Before U.S. went all crazy anti-China. There's actually a good NPR report on the Chinese labor transfer program from Xinjiang of organized Uyghur workers to work in inland China. I will find the link later, because you suddenly brought up.
And many of them advertise military surveillance of those workers. And if you think those workers got a choice in where they went, here's the funny thing. I've met some of them. They didn't have a choice.
You met some of them?
Yes.
Where? In Canada?
That would be an interesting thing for me to say.
How did you meet them in Canada? I'm just curious, because if they're on free labor in China, how did you meet them in Canada?
I can say that I have met someone who did not have their labor expropriated from them as a result of their choice. And they were Uyghur. And it was outside of Xinjiang. And they were not compensated for it.
Their labor has not been expropriated.
No, it was expropriated without their consent.
So how did they end up in Canada?
I'm not saying they were in Canada.
Okay,
but for their own safety, I can't really give.
So you are saying you are in contact with a Uyghur in China who working in the slave factories?
No.
Okay. So right now I just have
to take.
If
you can Google plenty of firsthand accounts. But look, the point is, this isn't a reason this isn't necessarily a reason for the wider world to check China's rising power. The question of can we or should we do something about what's happening in Xinjiang is a complicated question. I understand there's a very complicated history there. I'm not going to get into that. But my point is, you brought up, the U.S. did this thing, and now look, there's these terrible abuses of human rights. If you want to do the human rights battle, we can have that. That's not what the debate was about. So I advise that we stick to what the debate is about.
Oh, really? So, but that is a very serious accusation, right? You're
right. So I'm sure you'd like to talk about it instead of engaging with the fact that China is acting aggressively.
Portal. When you made the suggestion that anybody can go to Taobao, right, and order themselves a personal Uyghur slave. That's a very easily falsifiable claim, and it's a very serious accusation. That's why I call you out on it, right? But that's
all right.
fine.
Let me modify. A Chinese company can go on some form of business-to-business portal and purchase unfree Uyghur labor. Is that much better to say that a company can purchase rather than an individual? Is that like a big improvement?
What do you? So first of all, you are making a claim. You're making a claim it's unfree labor, right? And then you are just it's like making a claim like, why do you beat your wife?
Okay. Right? So if a person from China, if a person from rural China moves into urban China, they're going to be able to put their kids in public education, right? They're going to be able to get their public health care. Oh wait, no, they won't. Because of the hukou system, right? So right there, the idea that, they could just freely move. No, they can't. They can only move if they want social benefits of any kind. And even then, if they're through the labor transfer program, they're not receiving local social benefits because of the province-to-province arrangement because the province gets a cut of the wages, which goes to their budget as well. But the point is...
You're claiming all of China, all the Chinese are basically slave laborers. That's your claim right now.
No, I'm not slave, but I'm arguing that this idea that Uyghurs in Xinjiang have some like free labor option. They don't, right? It's not like they can just pick up and move to Beijing.
You're saying the Uyghur vendors who selling kebab on the street, he is doing it because he has no option. He's because he's forced to sell kebab on the street. Right. I mean, like anybody can go to China.
I know. I've been many times.
When you met a Uyghur kebab seller in Beijing or Shanghai, you are telling me, he's selling unfree labor of himself.
I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that his presence there is, again, China's very clear about the issues with the internal migration situation, that China regulates it to limit who can claim social benefits where, that he is a second-class citizen there already simply by virtue of not having a local residence permit, right? Already right there. When you add on top of that suspicion of Uyghurs, of Muslims, when you add on top of that the fact that he may be facing additional surveillance of his family or his situation back in Xinjiang.
That's a huge jump. Like what you just said, even if it's true, it's a huge jump from people being human beings being sold in open market
debate about whether or not. Is there?
Okay, let's.
If you make it more polite,
is it better? Let's move on to the original
topic. Yes, I agree.
You
should not have introduced the question of slave trade.
And I will address the economic issue later, because I will address it because you base a lot of your assumption upon the Chinese economic growth. But first, there's a point that you raised about the Qing dynasty did not have borders, right? So this is a map.
Did not have exactly fixed borders.
This is a map of China by John Nicaragua Dower, a British guy in 1844. This is this is a very detailed map. You can open it up, zoom in.
I can't see the map.
Oh, okay. It's loading. It's loading slowly. And this is a huge map. It's very detailed. You can zoom in. You can zoom in into like a section where the border of Tibet and India. You can see Kashmir is labeled here.
And you'll find other maps that draw different lines. And it's interesting that you cite a British map maker, right? One would think that you would have a map maker associated with the Qing dynasty's government.
The reason I cite a British map, because anytime I cite Chinese sources, you will just dismiss, that's a Chinese claim. We can trust the Chinese claim. So that's why
I'm happy to accept the reality of Chinese claims. However, you can't just show one map. I understand you can show a map that has a line on it, and then you'll find another map and it has a different line, and another map and it has a different line. They vary because the border was not precisely fixed.
Okay, let me.
Again, you have to keep in mind the border disputes that are happening right now aren't over like 1,000 miles.
Very detailed.
They're over like a few hundred yards.
About Arunachal Pradesh, because that you brought it up, right?
Hey, gonna jump in real quick, you guys. A lot of people in the chat are kind of just saying they want you guys to speak one at a time, so just try to keep that in mind.
Okay. So now I want to talk about the border at Arunachal Pradesh, one of the disputed area between China and Tibet, and the McMahon line that was drawn. So this area, the area in red, this is a disputed area between China and Tibet.
Sorry, again, I can't see the whatever map you're showing.
Okay, it's probably. Oh, let me see. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. So let me start sharing my screen. So now I'm presenting the disputed territory between China and India, the area of Arunachal Pradesh, right? What India called Arunachal Pradesh, because that's very recently named. I think in post 1960s.
Might have even been like the 1980s.
So this line, the reason why there's there are two lines. So there's a traditional boundary of the Qing Empire, or where the Qing Empire goes to, because it covered a lot of the Himalayan foothills. So the British officer McMahon observed this, and he was worried that there's no way the British could defend from supposedly a Russian incursion to defend from the plain. So he proposed to push the border up to the Himalayan ridge, right? So that's why he drew this line called McMahon line. As you mentioned, border is negotiated between two parties. Now, McMahon line was never negotiated with China. It was a line that was drawn on the border by the British. And on top of that, you're talking about, we don't know what's what. There's an area of the Arunachal Pradesh called the Dawang Tract. It's about right here. Let me see if I can pull it up. So Dawang is a region that practices Tibetan Buddhism. This is a famous Dawang monastery. Let me see if I have another map of Dawang itself. Let me pull it up. Okay, here. So this map right here, it's loading. Oh, it goes up to the map I uploaded. Okay, great. So this map right here, this is a region of Arunachal Pradesh that covers the Dawang Tract. So Dawang is very special to Tibet because the sixth Dalai Lama come from Dawang, and this area was under the administration of the Tibetan government until 1950. So until the Indian government sent in its troops to throw out the representative of the Tibetan government in 1950, as a response to the Chinese People's Liberation Army marching into Tibet. So up to this point, this area was administered by the government from Lhasa, right? So it's not like this is on no man's land. It's not being claimed. It was actually being actively administered by the Tibetan government, even though the British have drawn this line back in 1914, but they actually didn't enforce their claim because they got sidetracked by World War One. They unilaterally draw this line, and then they never got around to enforce it. But in 1950, in newly independent India, sending troops forcibly evicted the Tibetan monks from this area, and sent them packing back to Lhasa. So this is a very specific instance. I refute. You say it's not very clear. It's very clear this area was under the Tibetan administration. Another point that you brought up about how China's border is not defined so that the Chinese communists actually invaded Tibet or Xinjiang. So first of all, you can Google any maps of China during World War II or in 1930s, not map from China. I'm talking about map from U.S. Army, from the U.S. government, right? They will all label Tibet as part of China. So my point is not just somebody drew a map. The point is all the countries in the world, United States, even Britain, right? They recognize Tibet as part of China. And so it's like saying, maybe make a American analogy is, do you think United States invaded the Confederacy? Right? I mean,
yes, of course.
Oh, you think United States, it was an active invasion of the Confederacy? It was a foreign aggression.
Yes, I mean, when we talk about the Civil War, no, it was not a foreign, well, depends on how you look at it. But yes, I would certainly say that we invaded. In fact, this is almost an essential part of the historiography of the Civil War, is that and I'm obviously very pro-Union on this. I'm no defender of the Confederacy. But it is factually the case that Confederacy did not invade Union territory until the until Antietam.
Okay. We're getting into semantics here. But you're talking about Chinese aggression, right? You're talking about Chinese aggression against Tibet. Are you talking about
I didn't say anything about Chinese aggression against Tibet.
You brought up on Tibet and Xinjiang when we were talking about the Chinese borders. So that's why.
Oh, sure, but I was talking about aggression against Tibet in the 16 and 1700s, before they had it at all, when the Qing conquered it from the Dzungar Khanate.
Dzungar Mongols, they sending a force to conquer Tibet, right? They went in and they
people conquered territory.
They killed the Mongols as they were there before, and so the Qing government in response sending a force to evict the Dzungars from Tibet, right? So
people conquer land historically. It's what happens.
Okay, I mean, you do realize we're talking about 1700s. This was before the United States was even founded, right?
Yes, that is factually true.
There was we're talking about barely 13 colonies hugging the east coast of current United States right now, right? So
we're talking about claims that the People's Republic of China is still. We're talking about legal relationships that the People's Republic of China still asserts as active and valid.
Yes, under international law, right? So the Republic of China inherited the claims of the Qing Empire, and it's largely been recognized by all the countries of the world. And if you look at the U.S. maps, British map published, they will also show Tibet was part of China, and none of these countries recognize Tibet as an independent country. They all recognize Tibet as part of China.
I'm not here to litigate whether Tibet was an independent country or not.
So how can you claim it's a foreign aggression, right?
I didn't claim anything in particular. Oh, you mean how can I claim that if China rolled tanks into Arunachal Pradesh, I would call that aggression, because right now India has de facto control. And sending tanks in would involve killing people who did not shoot first, presumably, and therefore it is aggression. Now, you might argue, it's
China
legal. It may be
China
legal.
Sending tanks into Arunachal Pradesh?
No, they haven't. But what I'm saying is that they may be lower levels of aggression, but simply because you have some international claim, people make claims all the time. And you know what? Usually they don't get settled through these kinds of conflicts. Very few countries actually have conflicts with their border claims. So like right now, Armenia and Azerbaijan have a major conflict around territorial claims. Big problem, very concerning situation. If either country were also rapidly expanding economically, actively engaging with other countries diplomatically in third venues, if they were building aircraft carriers to go beyond their nearby areas, I would be worried because they're both clearly very irresponsible countries. Okay, I think we can agree Armenia, Azerbaijan, not good global citizens. In the same way, like Malaysia and Singapore have had a lot of disputes over random islands that did not involve them like ramming fishing boats into each other. And yet somehow, whenever China's involved, it ends up in like boats ramming each other and like fighting on the border and stuff. Because China is not a responsible actor in regards to its claims. It pushes them.
Because some fish boats were ramming each other, so it's
that is one example I'm giving. But the maritime and air challenges in China's various maritime claims are extensive and well documented, and you know that. I'm giving one example. My point is, you can get on. Just Google list of current territorial disputes. There are thousands of them, and yet somehow the ones involving China
They're not thousands of them. They're not thousands of them.
Okay,
right
there's
now, I already
hundreds
told you, China has
No, I'm not saying with China. I'm saying globally.
Except with India and Bhutan, and the rest is maritime disputes. And maritime disputes are with the literal states of South China Sea, and there are Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, right?
I wasn't talking about just China's disputes. We talk about China's disputes a lot because China's disputes get hot because China pushes them in an aggressive fashion. But when other countries have disputes, they don't have the same conflicts.
There has been no war in the last 30 years. There has been...
No, I'm not saying disputes with China. I'm saying just like if Malaysia and Singapore have a dispute, if India and Mauritius have a dispute, if Greenland and Canada, or Denmark and Canada, I guess, have a dispute, it doesn't have the same. It doesn't involve somebody trying to build an air base on a coral reef. Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about that because South China Sea.
Yes, let's talk about that because you don't want to actually go through the argument.
If you look at other claimants, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, they all built airstrips on the atolls they have claimed, and they have all pouring concrete on those reefs to build artificial islands. So China is not the only one. China is not the first. China is actually the last. The only difference is that China has more money, so you build a bigger artificial island, you build bigger airstrips. So that is, and also U.S. is making a bigger stink about it. You never hear people making a big stink about Vietnam building up artificial islands or Malaysia building artificial islands or Philippines building artificial islands and then putting a military base on them because all of them do that. And now let me go back to that.
The Philippines barely has a Navy or an Air Force. The reason no one gets concerned about it is because they lack the capacity to do anything with it.
Okay, now you said no one, right? You keep on saying people will worry about China and China need to be contained. Who exactly is crying out to contain China right now? You can give me the country. You can name the countries. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't make a claim that there was some specific group actually clamoring to contain China. I said that China should be contained.
No. Dude, tell me which country want to claim China,
No country wants to claim China.
Who wants to contain China?
Who wants to contain China? Well, I imagine that Japan doesn't want to lose the Senkaku Islands. Okay. I imagine that the Philippines doesn't want to lose their various claims.
Stop right there.
Because they won a court case against China recently that China refuses to recognize. I imagine that Vietnam doesn't want to lose their claims. I imagine, I used to work a lot in Africa. There's dozens of African countries where the governments the handful of people at the top are very happy with China because China lines their pockets very nicely. But the people who are kicked off of the farms so that Chinese agricultural conglomerates can buy 500,000 acres all at once for re-export to China, those farmers are not very happy with China. I could go on.
You are moving goalposts here. We're talking about country containing China. That's a very specific military, economic, political
Indonesia,
term, right?
Malaysia, Singapore.
So, okay, exactly.
Cambodia's pretty much bought and paid for at this point, but Thailand, Myanmar has interests, though they're a bit strange with the Rohingya issue on the border. There's India, there's Bhutan. Nepal's in a unique situation because they did resolve their border. At the same time, they're clearly very worried. They lodged a big protest when China reopened that one pass with India. I mean, you can talk to activists in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. There's plenty of anti-Chinese sentiment there. Need I go on? Yes.
Can I talk now? I want to respond. Okay. First of all, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, they do, yes, it's true. Its population have a long-standing sentiment of xenophobia. Part of it is a holdover from the Cold War propaganda, since Sino-Soviet split. But in terms of the border has been fixed between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan with China. There's no dispute
since 2011.
And the government of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are also very friendly to China. So that applies to most of the Central Asian republics. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, even though their population might have apprehensions and possible fear about rising of China, but all their governments are friendly with China. And now let's talk about the countries that want to contain China, right? So Nepal is on very friendly terms with China, actually. The reason that Nepal protested is because China concluded an agreement with India on one of its opening up one of its border pass for trade, but that's a border that Nepal dispute with India, because
Nepal's dispute on that border, actually they invented it after the pass was opened. They never disputed it before. They were upset because it meant that the pass that they had lost business.
Nepal and India, that was not a directly conflict between Nepal and China. In fact, Nepal and China has very friendly relationship. And let's talk about the other South China Sea nations. Philip, you brought up Philippines. Philippines, Duterte, after he came to power, he specifically made a point to say we can, put off the South China Sea dispute with China. He is working with China, right? Philippines is not at loggerheads with China right now, ever since Duterte came to power. So we can take the Philippines out, right? Malaysia, Singapore, they have very close relationship with the United States, but at the same time, the government of Singapore and Malaysia are also very friendly with China. You can read about the former Singaporean diplomat Kishore Mahbubani. He actually wrote a book called "Has China Won?" Right? He talked about the kind of the dynamic between United States and China, how U.S. is forcing ASEAN states to pick a side of United States against China, and how that's not working because most of the ASEAN states, they want to benefit from having a relationship.
I just have to correct a falsehood here. An article July 12th, 2020 says Foreign Secretary Territorial Luxin Jr. issued the call on the anniversary of the July 12th, 2016 ruling by an international tribunal in The Hague that he said conclusively settled the issue of historic rights and maritime entitlements in the South China Sea. He renewed the Philippines' call for compliance with a 4-year-old arbitration ruling that invalidated China's vast claims. So the idea that Philippines has given this up, literally 3 months ago, they renewed their call and said the award is non-negotiable. The tribunal authoritatively ruled, this is his words, that China's claim of historic rights to resources within the sea had no basis in law. So I'm just going to go ahead and say you're wrong. You've totally misread that. Duterte,
Foreign Minister of Philippines, he's a well-known for a pro-U.S. guy. You have to take what he say with a pinch of salt. But Duterte has
he's the foreign minister. Okay, sure, take it with a pinch of salt. The official legally binding statements of the country.
Let me take a backseat. And say you're right. you have also made an argument that that between countries are territorial disputes. There are territorial dispute between Canada and U.S. or there are territorial dispute between Malaysia and Singapore, right? That does not prevent countries still having have a normal relationship, right? Like Duterte is not calling for containment of China, first of all. Malaysia is not calling for containment of China. Singapore is not calling for containment China. You know, the countries that might be calling for containment China, I'll tell you who: Japan, right? Japan. And I'm not gonna count Taiwan because Taiwan is not a country. So you there you have it. You have Japan, right? Even India, which have this very contested relationship with China, even India has not come out and say we need to contain China, right? You can go find any Modi statement on need to contain China. I don't think you'll find any. So right now, what we're saying is nobody in the neighborhood, right, with possible exception of Japan, right, is calling for containment of China. Even the Japanese has not come out and publicly said it that we need to contain China. They stress on, working on the U.S.-Japan security alliance, right, because they wanted to balance against China. Like containment is a very specific term, right? Which harkens back to the Cold War, right? When you have
it means building alliance networks that orient nearby countries to check potential aggression and to limit spread of influence. So you say the Philippines, they did this one thing, but they didn't do this other thing. The Philippines, for the first time, designed and built their own naval frigates because they're so worried about them. Is massively expanding its Navy operations, and particularly on the submarine front.
Have the U.S. Military base came back to the Philippines?
To my knowledge, no. Although I think we might have gotten some air landing rights again. Not like a full. I think we can refuel there now.
The Philippines have kicked out U.S. U.S. Subic Bay used to be one of the largest U.S. military base in Southeast Asia. The Philippines has not invited U.S. back. If they want to contain China, you will see U.S. military base in the Philippines. And same thing with Vietnam, right? Vietnam's Communist Party leadership has a working relationship with the Communist Party of China. They, after 1990, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they have to come to agreement, right, to have a working relationship despite all the border disputes, despite the maritime disputes in South China Sea. That's why you see Vietnam and China resolve their land borders between 1990 and 2000. Right. So it's understandable that Vietnam might want to have U.S. to come in to play a balancing role versus China. Right. Because, China is a very powerful neighbor to its north. But at no point did Vietnam call out for, welcome.
Balancing is containment. They're the same thing. If you're calling in a major foreign power to balance against a local power to prevent them from changing the status quo, then you are by definition attempting to contain them, to preserve the status quo, to avoid a change in the status quo. That is containment. That's the definition.
Let's go to the definition first. Maybe we should define what do you mean by containment?
I mean that China's status quo must be maintained, that there cannot be a change in it, that it has to be clear to China that any change in the status quo will be met and checked.
When you talk about China's status quo, you're talking about China's territory, China's currently
de facto control.
Has the China's de facto control changed in the last 30 years?
Yeah.
Or the last 3 years, because
there have been attempts to change it.
That have it changed?
No, because China's failed.
Okay.
Although, actually, there's a couple places along the Indian border where the line of actual control does seem to have changed a little bit. We're talking like a couple hundred yards here. It's not major, but no, China has not successfully changed their territory of de facto control, but they have attempted to do so. In 2017, they certainly did. There's no dispute about that. Certainly, there's a desire to do so in Taiwan.
You're telling me like a scrap for a couple hundred yards in the Himalayan high desert necessitate a huge military alliance to do a Cold War 2.0 containment of China. Is that what you're telling me? I mean, as far as I know, right now we have the U.S. proposed Quad, right? So-called Quad of democracies: Japan, India, Australia, and U.S. to contain China. And so far, the four nations have held military exercise and all that. But are you calling for? Are you satisfied with that, or you're calling for something even more, like in terms of containment? So I
think that we should be actively pursuing cooperation with any country in the region that wants it.
Okay, I mean how is that different from the current U.S. policy or the U.S. policy for
because the U.S. has actually, in the region, has generally stuck to freedom of navigation exercises on our own. For example, when we do freedom of navigation exercises around contested territories, contested islands and reefs and things like that in the South China Sea,
historically, can you explain freedom of navigation to our audience?
Oh, sure. It means we sail a boat really, really close to stuff that China claims.
But the purpose of freedom of navigation patrol
is to demonstrate that we do not recognize a claim, that we do not regard it as a valid form of claim. We don't think that we're violating international law by doing this. But other countries also do this, but the U.S. has historically not done freedom of navigation exercises with other countries. So like we might do one, and Vietnam might do one, but we don't do them together. But I think we should start doing them together. I also think that we should be more assertive in air challenges over international waters. And I think that we should be, any country that wants a base, we should be willing to provide them one. So if Taiwan would like a permanent U.S. land base, I think we should consider establishing one. If any other country would like one, we should be seriously exploring that option. Not because we want, and maybe not us. Maybe we don't do it. Maybe Japan is a better thing to do that because people have concerns about U.S. imperialism, and I understand that concern. It's a legitimate concern. Or maybe the countries in the region will band together and kind of collaborate more intensively on security matters, although Laos and Cambodia are really hurdles to that because they're pretty bought and paid for at this point. I would like to see the countries in the region more assertively advance their own interests, and I think that the United States has a valid role in supporting small countries who are being bullied by bigger ones. Sorry, if you're talking, you're muted. I can't hear, or maybe you're not saying anything.
Your voice is breaking up. It might be my internet. I'm not sure. Xiangyu, can you hear me, or can you hear Lyman clearly?
Both of you have been clear for me, so I think it might be on your end. Am I breaking up too?
Right now, I didn't really hear what Lyman said because the voice is really choppy.
Okay, Lyman, could you please repeat the last bit you said?
Sure. Very simply, I'm saying that I think that the countries in question should assert their interests and that the U.S. should be willing to provide support to small countries that are being pushed around.
Okay. I mean, how are you saying the countries are not? Are you saying the countries are currently not asserting their self-interest, or they don't know what their best self-interest is?
I think many countries would like to be more assertive with China, but they feel they're unable to do so because they can't risk the business, they don't have the Navy, any number of reasons. And we can play ignorant about this, but this doesn't even need a citation. This is obviously true. They have claims that are disputed by China.
We actually do have citation. So I recommend everybody go out to get the book by the former Singaporean diplomat Kishore Mahbubani. He was he was in the midst of it, right? He represented Singapore, and he's very familiar with the U.S. strategy vis-a-vis China in Southeast Asia, and he's of course very much aware of what the self-interest of the Southeast Asian nation lies. So I recommend people go read that, and you have a very, very different view from the view that Lyman presented, what Lyman thinks that those nations are feeling right now. Because what is actually happening is most of the countries in the world, not just even limited to Southeast Asia, but most countries in the world rather to have a relationship with China, to trade with China. But now they're being forced by the United States, especially the policy under the Donald Trump's administration, to choose, right, to pick side. Most countries rather not pick a side between U.S. and China. They like to sit in the comfortable middle. I mean, while they enjoy a relationship with both U.S. and China, because the trade relationship with China is very beneficial for many of these countries. And the point that from what I'm hearing, right, it's this desire for people to rise up and contain China. It's more like a projection from the U.S. national security establishment. They would very much like this country to volunteer their services to work with the military to contain China. Whether those countries do it or not, first of all, these countries are sovereign countries. They can make up their own mind. They can make their own independent foreign policy. So whether they choose to work with U.S. to contain China or that, it's really up to them. Right now, I have not seen, people really. I have not seen
here's
any
the reality.
They
have claims. They have claims that are clearly disputed with China. They have maritime challenges. They have air challenges. And as of 2019, I'm looking at public opinion polls right now. Southeast Asia had more negative attitudes of China than the world on the whole by a very large margin. So now, if you want to get really positive views of China, you can look at the Middle East.
Actually, I would challenge you.
You can look at Latin America.
You can.
No, I'm looking at the public opinion polls right now.
Yes. Give me the number for Indonesia, because Indonesia is the largest, most populous Southeast Asian country.
Indonesia is split 36% unfavorable, 36% favorable. Exactly. But if you go somewhere in Latin America, like Brazil, it's 51%
We're not
favorable.
even in the neighborhood right now.
But what I'm saying is that, in fact, Southeast Asia has a more negative view of China than is average around the world. So
that's understandable, because they're China's neighbors. So
right. So I'm saying, I'm sorry, but you might want to think about what it implies about China, that you think it's understandable that the people who dislike them the most are their neighbors. Most people like their neighbors. Okay,
have you
Americans and Canadians don't dislike each other.
Have you looked at opinion polls in Latin America of United States? I mean, you're making a claim that most people's neighbors like each other. Do you really want to know the Mexicans' opinions of United States?
Well, I know there's 12 million of them here, so they can't hate us that much.
They can still hate the government of the United States and still want to enjoy the life, still want to make a living in U.S., right? They don't contradict each other. It's not a contradiction, really.
Could I butt in for a second?
It's not about making a living, though. They come here and they gain citizenship and desire to become Americans.
Could I butt in for a second?
Go ahead.
I feel if your country is experiences destabilization at the hands of the U.S. and your country ends up being run by cartels and stuff like that, there is an incentive to leave the country just for not because you love the U.S. so much, but just to get some semblance of stability, even if that means you become a second or third class citizen or not citizen, undocumented or whatever. It's that's the choice that many people face. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Shangyu. Thank you for that. I mean, we can look. Do we really want to look at the public opinion polls in Latin America of United States? I mean, if you really want to compare, that's a fair comparison, apple to apple comparison, right? The opinion polls of Latin American countries of United States versus.
So I'm looking in 2018. Let's see, in 2018. 66% of 66% of people in Mexico had a favorable view of the United States. So doesn't seem that bad.
Okay, that's Mexico. Now, can you give me another Latin American country?
Unfortunately, we don't have polls for tons of them. Argentina was 43%, so that's lower. They're also not actually our neighbor. Brazil was 73% positive. I mean, those are the three biggest, I think. So I don't know.
Brazil
it
is not a
bad.
neighbor either.
No, it's closer. I mean, but look, the point is, like, no, it's not that bad. Now, it's probably worse. It's probably gotten worse recently. I mean, of course, Trump is like nuclear radiation to the U.S.'s public image. I'm certainly aware of that. But, you know, my point in all of this, and, you know, we really need to wrap this up, and I'll let you get the final word because I spoke first, so I'll let you speak last. We can argue about whether China's claims are legitimate or not, and some of them probably are, and some of them probably aren't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that China makes tons of claims, legitimate or not, that are different from the status quo, and that for China to pursue them will require major concessions or severe conflicts with other countries. At the same time that China does this, they are increasing the capacity to resolve those disputes violently. They may also attempt to resolve them peacefully, I hope so, but in fact they're clearly preparing to settle them violently at the same time that we see the government very explicitly in public rhetoric turn away from an economics first kind of policy agenda. Now, you may come up with some other interpretation of this. There may be some mental acrobatics that can explain why they're moving away from sort of, you know, reform and opening towards like pursue all the claims and build aircraft carriers to enforce them. But to a first approximation, whether the claims are legitimate or not, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's very likely to lead to conflict. It is very likely to ultimately trigger war. It is very likely to ultimately leave everybody worse off. And that is the worry. It's not about legitimacy. It's about peace. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll give you the last one.
Okay. I have heard, you know, a lot of your conjecture is based on assumptions, right? The assumption that China will, China will probably maybe resolve this conflict violently. I'm just pointing to history, the recent history. In the last 30 years, China have not engaged in any wars in its neighborhood or anywhere else. And on top of that, and let's go back to the addressing economy, because you seem to base a lot of your assumption on this, Chinese economic growth is slowing down, right? So the reason Chinese economic growth has been explosive, right? Because China started at such a low base. And, I know this because I grew up in China in 1980s. I remember in 1982, my mom bought my grandparents my mom bought my grandparents a black and white television. That was the only television in the village. All the village kids came. That was how far China has come as a nation in its development. And that I'm losing my train of thoughts for a second, just because I'm trying to recollect my memories back in the 1980s. But my argument is that China was able to grow very rapidly because it started out from a very low base, because China did not have a head start. China, first suffered the wars, invasions, and then, suffered the turmoils of Cultural Revolution. So China only beginning to have a time to develop since 1978. And since then, the development has been very rapid. But China is a giant economy. Right now, China is the world's second largest economy behind United States in the nominal dollar terms. And in the PPP terms, in the purchase power terms, China is already world's largest economy. When your economy is that big, your growth naturally slows down. And if you look at the Chinese growth, there's actually a data recently published by I think Business India that shows the last quarter growth in around the globe, right? China is compared to its past, China post-COVID, of course, China growth slowed down quite a bit. But right now, China is the only major economy that's actually growing right now. It's growing by a very small marginal amount, but compared to United States, India, where there's major economic contraction going on because of COVID, China is not doing too bad. And again, the slowing down is natural because when you are such an economy, such a big economy, after reached a certain point, the growth rates start to plateau. This is just a nature of economic development. It's not even like I'm sure if the Chinese government, if they could engineer a higher economic growth, they'll probably try. But the point is, right now the Chinese standard of living has improved so much because I grew up in China in 1980, so I can contrast with my own life. I visited my relatives last year in China. There's such a night and day difference in terms of people's standard of living. Now people are demanding more things rather than just more things to buy. Now people are demanding better environment, right? Less corruption, and those are the things the Chinese government is concentrating on right now. They have a very big drive to clean up the air and the water because those are the areas that has been neglected in the past 30 years of breakneck development in order to raise the GDP growth. The water has been polluted, the air has been polluted, and now China actually making a huge progress in cutting down the greenhouse gas emission. They're putting a lot of measure to build renewable energy, both in solar, hydraulic, nuclear, etc. And they're leading world in these areas, right? And so China its focus is different. It doesn't mean it's slowing down the economy because it wants to go expand aggressively in war. I mean that's it's just a leap of logic that's just too far stretched out for me. And I know it's late, and I know we have some questions from audience, so I'm gonna yield my mic to Xiangyu so he can fill in some question and answer sessions going on from the audience. Go ahead, Xiangyu.
So Lyman said that since it's late here in the Eastern time zone, we're gonna just narrow it down to one or two questions. So I've kind of compacted them. So hope that's okay with you guys. So, I guess the first question is, what if the policy of containment leads to a greater chance of violent war? Should we abandon diplomatic and more peaceful methods to affect China into a more peaceful foreign policy?
I guess that's a question for me. When the U.S. undertook containment against the Soviet Union, we never broke off diplomatic relations with them. In fact, the Cold War is an interesting case where we had two superpowers diametrically opposed who ultimately never went to war. Containment worked. It worked well. Yes, there were peripheral conflicts that led to serious human losses that I think we shouldn't just ignore. At the same time, the world walked to the brink of nuclear war and walked back. So I don't think we should look at the legacy of containment and say, oh, it failed. War was avoided. It succeeded. So, but yeah, of course you have to keep up diplomatic ties. We shouldn't be severing diplomatic ties with each other. We have an important relationship. The economic relationship is very important. The social and cultural relationship is important. I mean, aside from economics, China is one of the largest, oldest, and most significant cultures in the world. We don't want to wall that off from the wider world because we have so much to benefit. I say we, meaning people outside of China, have so much to benefit from interaction with that culture. So containment refers to creating a situation where the strategic balance is deeply unfavorable to a change in sort of status quo power relationships. It doesn't mean like dropping paratroopers into Shanghai or something. It's not what we're talking about here.
Okay, so I guess
So
on
okay,
this.
so
Sorry.
Yeah.
I like to put in my 2 cents. Like this, a lot of Lyman's point based on the assumption that China is a non-status quo power. China is trying to change things around. That's why we must be proactive to stop China before it even starts. So now we actually have the New York Times op-ed published by none other than the former Indian ambassador to China, Vijay Gokhale. This was from June 4th, 2020. People can look it up. And the title is China Does Not Want a New World Order because it wants this one. Because why? Because China has been enjoying being part of the globalization process. China has been very much benefiting from a participant of the world system for the last 30 years. Like I already mentioned how my family, has seen the material well-being improve tremendously in leaps and bounds in the last 30 years. This happened because China played its role, right? China integrated itself into the world system, and it wants to remain so because it continued to benefit from being part of this world system. Because time is on China's side. If there's no Cold War, there's no containment, China's economy is just going to grow, and China is going to continue to rise, and China will be, undisputably the number one dominant economy in the world. So why would China want to change things around? I mean, that's actually ridiculous.
There's a good answer to that question. I'm not going to dispute any of what you said about China being a status quo power or not. Obviously, we disagree, but I'm not going to harp on that. But there is a reason why now is important for China. The long run is not good for China. And the reason is China has net outflow of people through migration. It has a very low birth rate, and its population is already in decline. In the long run, the balance of economics is very much in favor of the United States, and very much in favor of the U.S. alliance network, simply because of population dynamics. Now, China's trying to change that. They're switching in. I mean, this is like where I very much am in my expertise because I'm a demographer. China's attempting to change this. We're seeing a change in policy away from one child to now 2 child, and they're doing some things to try and encourage childbearing, but so far it hasn't been highly successful. And in terms of China's economic growth, it was historically quite good. It's not so good anymore. By my count, even before COVID, let's see, that's 7 Chinese provinces were already in a multi-year long recession in real terms. That was before COVID. So, I think we need to get rid of this image in our head of China as this like super fast grower. China's growth rate before COVID had already fallen to below the level of other East Asian countries that when they were at a similar level of industrialization. And in many provinces, it was extremely low, like Gansu province. I mean, obviously it's very poor, but they've already fallen to like a 2% growth rate with income levels barely above what we see in sub-Saharan Africa. That's not convergence economic growth, right? That's a deep and severe problem. So what I would say is, why might now be important for China? Because growth is already slowing down very rapidly in China. It's already below normal for an East Asian country at this level of development. At the same time, the demographic situation for China is going to be quite severe over the next few decades. So if you were ever going to make a play to change things, the next 2 decades would be the time. Now,
okay,
I'm not saying that they will, but I'm saying that if you were ever going to, this would be the time.
Let's assume you're right? United States is going to win out anyway. China is going to decline. U.S. is still going up and up. Then why not let the current trend continue? Why do we need an active Cold War? Trend,
a Cold War is not active. That's what makes it cold. Like, that's the definition of being cold.
Why do we even need a Cold War?
I feel like we have some ambiguity about what a Cold War is. You don't choose to have a Cold War. two countries have different interests, they choose not to make it a hot war. But a Cold War is just a description of two countries with competing interests. The US and China have competing interests. Like, that's just reality.
Is you're saying containment is a passive measure now. Is that what you're saying?
Containment is a specific strategy when confronting this kind of situation. The alternatives
Why China needs to be contained if China is going down the tubes anyway?
Because over the next few decades are a time where China will be powerful enough and will have all of the incentive that it needs to make a stab for sort of readjusting its position for the next century.
But I thought China is going down the tubes.
Yes. No, I didn't say down the tubes. I'm just saying this rapid catch-up growth is going to tail off. There's going to be demographic problems. In 75 years, we won't have to worry about these conflicts. But over the next 10 to 30 years, yes, we need to establish a very real strategic deterrent. That will guarantee the peace that will get all of us a very happy later half of the 21st century.
Okay, so who do you think supports your, this containment, cry out for containment right now? Which country?
Very few people. Very few people, even in the U.S., support it because I think people are very naive.
Okay.
Any other questions? You've said that my view is aligned with the national security establishment. My experience interacting with people in the national security establishment is that they think I'm insanely hawkish and they don't need to do any of this.
Any other questions, Xiangyu?
Yes, so one of them was kind of addressed, and so I'm just going to read it anyways. I think the two can be combined. One of them is, should the world be multipolar or should there be a hegemony? And the other is, if China should be contained, why should the U.S. not be contained?
I guess these are aimed at me again in terms of multipolarity.
Well, you guys can discuss it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my view is that you don't have a choice about the polarity of the world. It's not like you can choose how many poles the world has. It has a certain number based on the real distribution of power. We don't exercise choice over these things. These are fundamental interests. These are, in some sense, a material process that's outside of our willful action. We have a choice on how to respond to it. And there are times where we can shape it, but you don't just choose how many poles the world has. We live in a multipolar world. That is reality. We have to figure out how to do that. So I would say that. And then the second question embedded in there was, should we contain the U.S. too? I definitely think that other countries need to step up their game in the security dilemma, that I think the European countries need to stop expecting that the U.S. is going to do all the dirty work for the Western world. And I think that, I think we would benefit from other countries taking a little more responsibility for global security, because I think failure to do so it just enables aggression in many ways, in some cases by the U.S., because the U.S. feels like, well, if we don't do it, no one will, right? But if there was someone else who would be like, look, you don't have to handle this, we'll try and sort this out our own way, like, we wouldn't feel this pressure to like be America world police. But instead, we're like the only, like, someone invades Kuwait and it's like, well, I guess it's going to be America's problem. It shouldn't be our problem. We should be able to like sit at home, be on the ocean, and just like be really loud and annoying.
Okay, so I like to respond to. First, I agree with Lyman that we are in the multipolar world right now because the era of U.S. hegemony is ending. It's the post-Cold War decade, the decade of 1990s, the decade of the end of history, that's gone because just because that was a very rare moment when U.S. powers was on challenge because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. China was still relatively poor and undeveloped back then. And now with different countries are building back up their power, including China, U.S. hegemony will be increasingly challenged. And U.S. will find it harder and harder to maintain its global dominance. Now, having said that, I like to respond to what Lyman said. But I mean, Lyman implies that we kind of got our somebody is pointing a gun to our head for us to go invade Iraq, right? And the Iraq like somebody is literally twisting our arm to find a weapon of mass destruction excuse in order to invade Iraq and destroy it, and somebody is forcing us to go intervene in Libya, right? Somebody is forcing us to do regime change in Syria. You know what? Nobody is forcing us. U.S. has sovereignty. U.S. is a sovereign nation, and U.S. get to do whatever it wants because its power is not being checked. And I think multipolar world is good because that means there will be checks on the unlimited U.S. hyperpower, including checks by growing strength of China, and that would be the good thing for the world. So U.S. doesn't run amok, all across the globe. Any more questions, Xiangyu?
Yeah, maybe we can do one more.
Hey, so everyone in chat, do you guys have any questions? I don't see any. Okay, that's just a comment. Hey, we got 15 seconds for last. Okay, first come, first serve. Lyman, why do you think you are in the very few in your nihilistic thinking on containing China? What have you done to get Southeast Asian leaders onto your side on this? What grunt work have you done to reach that consensus?
None. I'm not a diplomat. I was for a little while, not anymore, and not on this issue. But it's not my job. I'm a guy on Twitter who has opinions having a debate. So if you expect me to be the Secretary of State, I'm sorry, I'm not him. I hope Carl can get Secretary Pompeo on the line to have a debate. It'd be entertaining. But
you'd be a fun Secretary of State, by the way.
Oh, I don't know. But I think that this is the thing, is that when people don't have an argument to make, they make it personal.
So my last few seconds, I repeat my recommendation for people to go get the book. Has China won? I'm trying to pull it up, but it's all like Indonesian website right now but if I don't know if people can see this. This is a book called Has China Won? It's by Kishore Mahbubani, the former diplomat of Singapore, and he specifically talk about U.S.-China competition, and in context of Southeast Asia, but also in the global stage. It's a very good book. Go check it out. And I think he has done a couple interviews. One of my friend, Daniel Dumbrill, interviewed him on his YouTube channel. We can probably link to it. So people go listen to that, check out his book. I think that offer a more professional assessment of the current geopolitical situation. I mean, me and Lyman here, we're just a bunch of armchair generals. We're doing this as our hobby. So that's my recommendation for everyone.
If you're doing book recommendations, I'll just say John Mearsheimer's The Tragedy of Great Power Politics.
Okay, I actually like John Mearsheimer's book. I mean, I'm a fan of his theories, but again, I think there's a lot of assumptions, based on his theory.
Fair enough.
And one of the premise is that the kind of the U.S. and China is basically in the so-called Thucydides trap, right? The rising power versus the declining or the status quo power. My 2 cents of that is, don't fall into the trap, man. Don't fall into Thucydides trap. There's no need. Really, like, why? There's really no need for a Cold War. Like, both countries have enormous potential and have enormous problems as well. Like, both countries should all focus on their own internal development. Like the Cold War is something nobody need. I lived through Cold. I'm old enough to have lived through the tail end of the Cold War. I do not wish to see the return of it. So that's my... I agree.
All countries should focus on their internal development, and if China can stick to that, we'll be okay. And on that, it's quite late here. I need to go to bed. It's been
3 hours. Wow.
Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation, but I am quite tired. So
thank you.
You have a nice day in Bali. I wish I had that weather here.
Yeah, thank you for making your time, Lyman. Thank you for...
My pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Okay. Bye
Thanks for
bye.
being on. And thanks everyone for putting up with all the technical difficulties. And if we do this in the future, rest assured it won't happen again.
And we will put this recording on YouTube, so people who miss this will have a chance to view it. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks to Lyman for taking up on the offer to debate. Thank you for Xiangyu for providing technical support, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Let's end this call. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.